Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining in. I see people are joining us now. Are you all seeing that bottom toolbar on my screen? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that went away. Okay. Great. Awesome. People are joining in. So thank you all very much for joining Ask Mayfield Anything. This is our February 2023 episode. And as people are joining in, I will, kind of do a little housekeeping here. This is very much intended to be interactive. We want to hear questions from you. So as we're going along, if you hear something, have a question about something any of our guests are talking about, feel free to throw a question out there for us. Ask that you use the Q&A section of the webinar. So there's a question and answer button in the Zoom link that you have. And so if you use that as opposed to the chats will get very often lost. So please just put everything in the Q&A. And then, as we're going along, we'll keep an eye on those and be sure and try to answer questions as we're going. So try and keep this as interactive as possible. So thanks again for joining. And so we'll kind of get jumping in here. So for those of you who aren't familiar, my name is Ryan Mayfield, founder of Mayfield Renewables. And so I will be really kind of just hosting this and having our presenters give most of the information here today, but I'll be talking with them and going over our topic today, talking about life after net metering. So today on the call, we have Brad Heavner, from Policy Director at CALSSA, Roland Shackelford, President, Owner at Renewable Energy Services out of Hawaii, and then Robert Cross, Founder and CEO of Cross Consulting. So I've been working with the three of them on various capacities over the years. And so I just wanted to give everybody an opportunity to introduce themselves, kind of a little bit about what you're doing now, I guess, and specifically as it relates to the net metering stuff. So Brad, why don't you start us off and introduce yourself?
All right, very good. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me on here. It's good to be part of this. I am Policy Director at CALSSA. I've been in this position for 9 years, and the past 2 years have been completely consumed by net metering, all aspects of my personal life almost. And we are coming out of it, that we have a decision that is gradually getting implemented. So I have been really in the middle of that, negotiating on behalf of the solar and storage industry, and all kinds of battle happening politically here in California heading towards this decision. So I'll be happy to share a few details later.
Great. Roland?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Glad to be joining you. Sorry for the background noise. It is pouring rain out here in Hawaii, but I'm president and owner of Renewable Energy Services. We're an EPC contractor out in Hawaii. The company was founded in 1992 by my father. I've grown up in the industry and kind of been hands-on in the industry since I could hold a wrench. So we've gone through the NEM ending here in Hawaii in 2015 and to where we are today with about 90% of our systems integrating energy storage. So happy to share that experience with everybody.
Awesome. Thanks. And Robert?
Hey, Ryan. It's good to see you. Brad, Roland. I work as a business strategy consultant, have been in the industry for 15 years. Today, I focus a lot on the revenue model of the clients I work with. They're typically design engineer firms, EPCs. I do some product market fit, market research work with Mayfield, with manufacturers in our industry and service providers. And kind of second aspect is agency work with a sister company that also works with the same clients in the industry.
Great. I'm really glad all three of you could take the time to talk with us today. And so everybody has some pretty valuable experience, some perspective on this topic. And so real quick before we jump in, just for those who are not familiar with Mayfield Renewables, we are a technical consultancy. We do a lot of system design, engineering, education, training, things similar to this AMA. We have code corners and do courses for contractors on various topics. And then we do a lot of technical consulting and microgrid support. So if there's any way we can support you, feel free to reach out to us. Happy to talk to you about different services. So with that, we'll jump in, get into this life after net metering. And so as a lot of people are aware, I should say that the industry in California specifically has a big change right on the horizon. NEM 3.0 is coming right up, and Brad will be able to give us a lot more information on that. And interestingly enough, this was something that Hawaii experienced back in, I think it was 2015, kind of that time frame when net metering went away from Hawaii. So there's a lot of lessons learned from Hawaii, and so Roland's going to be able to help kind of give some perspective around that as well. So, net metering, how did we get here, and what we're used to with net metering is really maybe overly simplistic thing, and maybe it's not quite this simple in a number of locations anymore. This is very much the situation I'm at my home. I live in Oregon, and we have a very simplistic net metering system where the energy you produce minus the energy you consume equals your net energy. So if you overproduce any given month, you get a credit on your bill. It rolls into the next month. If you have a deficit where you don't produce as much as you consume in any given month, you get billed for that difference. And so this has been, what the industry has grown quite accustomed to. And this is what the foundation, I guess, of everything that we've had. I don't know if anybody on the panel has anything to pop in and say about kind of what this is. I know California has a little bit different, we'll talk about net metering too, and kind of time of use a little bit. Brad's got a slide on that. So it's maybe not overly simplistic everywhere, but in essence, that is what we have when we're talking about net metering. So that is kind of the basis of wanting to kind of set that stage. I think a lot of people on the call will probably already understand that aspect of net metering. As it stands, and so this is where I'm going to lean on Brad and Roland here a lot. So we have California. We have some high bullets on California, NEM 2 and 3.0, which is the newest net metering policy, and then Hawaii. So Brad, let's start over in California and kind of talk about this. And so one of the bullets I have here is NEM 2 was actually originally viewed as a temporary solution, and during the prep for this, you had a good comment about how this actually directly relates to Hawaii.
Well, yeah, and I think it's really a great idea to talk about the NEM 3 and with the perspective from Hawaii right now, because this that was very relevant during the NEM 2 discussion that happened at a similar time. And this has been in the works since 2013, that there's a push to change the NEM rules given the growth in California of solar and the changing value to the grid, and so it's been it's been a policy topic for a very long time. And then they came up. The intention was to come up with a final decision in 2015, and change to a new NEM, and that'd be done. In the process, they came up with some complications, realized that it's just hard to balance reducing the amount that the utilities give you for your exports and maintaining a strong market, and wanting to do both things. So they came up with this NEM 2 that was a holding pattern, and part of the reason that we were able to get them to not make more drastic changes at that time is what had just happened in Hawaii, where they did away with net metering overnight. From the way it looked to me, without notice, and massive job loss, and small businesses shutting down. And that was what we warned the California policymakers: don't let that happen here. And they listened, and they said, okay, we want to head in a certain direction, but we don't want to ruin the market. And so we're going to make light changes, and we'll come back again in 2019. Time slipped. 2019 became 2021 before they actually started. Now the end of 2022 is when they finally made the decision. So now they have made much more drastic changes. to the export rates. So it's not NEM credits anymore. And the utilities are actually, they get rankled when we still use the word NEM 3 because it's technically the net billing tariff. So going from net metering to net billing. And so you'll see NBT a lot. NBT is not NEM, it's NBT. And so, but we still use NEM 3. That's our parlance, and that, I'm not trying to make any point there. It's just our shorthand. So but it's changed to a net billing tariff where the export rates are divorced from the retail rates. They're set at certain values that are far lower than rates, and they're very complex, as we'll see in a few minutes. You note here that it's 500 rates per year, so it's complicated, complex, and much lower value on average. And those will get updated over time, but we expect them to be mostly stable.
So Roland, I'm curious on that. So the comment that Brad just made about the rates being kind of divorced from each other. So I guess talk to us a little bit about net metering in Hawaii. Kind of, so it ended in 2015, and so I guess first off, what did that look like for the industry as a whole from your perspective?
Yeah, so net energy metering ended in Hawaii. The actual program end date that you had to have an application in was October 2015. We had a large influx in 2015 of permits just because of a lot of contractors sales teams encouraging people to hurry up and get in before it ends. Most contractors probably had about 6 months to a year of backlog that rolled into 2016. And then it ended, and then the program, it was an intermediary program called CGS, Customer Grid Supply, and secondary was Customer Self-Supply. Customer Self-Supply was zero export. Customer Grid Supply had 15 cents credit for exported energy, and retail rate at the time was around 42 cents. The Customer Grid Supply or exported energy zeroed out each month, so you wouldn't get a rollover through a year like net energy metering you did. That program actually filled up pretty quickly. And once again, it was probably like your NEM 2.0, but it filled up pretty quickly. It only lasted about 2 years before we rolled into CGS Plus, which we're currently at, where you get a 10.5 cents credit for exported energy. Retail rate has been pretty volatile through COVID, but ranging from 42 cents as high as 52 cents. Where the export energy stays constant at 10.5 and the retail rate changes. But I don't know, here on the Big Island, we're probably 4th or 5th on population through the state. We have 3 different utilities through the state of Hawaii, actually 4. One of them in Kauai is a co-op, but 3 main utilities. We're out of the 3 main, we're the smallest. And we had about 200 primary contractors doing PV during the NEM days. That dropped down to about 10. Through the intermediary program, most of the larger companies didn't even operate in our market, so it went back to a lot of smaller contractors. We were fortunate to have a baseline with off-grid systems. That's what our company was founded on, and we still had a large portion of our work, so that helped us roll through the intermediary program. But basically with NEM ending, the new products in 2016, I think we're going to get into that a little bit more, but they weren't vetted. There was a lot of uncertainty on how to model the value or the economic return for customers, as well as making sure these new products work. So it was a difficult time. It's taken us almost 6 years to be able to get back to the capacity that we were doing prior to NEM ending.
Yeah, you mentioned you had some numbers on like just solar permits that have been pulled over the years, and there was a steady and kind of rapid decline starting after your, that bump in 2015, 2016. And it sounded like it wasn't until 21, 22, even this year, seeing those increases. And of course, tough to say, COVID's going to have an impact on that on some levels, but just seeing that decline and for Hawaii to just now, 6+ years later takes for it to recover.
Yeah, in our island, we are doing between 2,000 and 3,000 permits per year for PV. 2016. Now, this is county permits that usually trail our utility permits. So 2015, we're at a high of about just under 3,000, dropped to 1,200 in 2016, then dropped to 917. And we stayed at 900 for 2017, 18, 19, dropped down to 800 in 2020. 2021, we actually started a new online permitting that had a long backlog on permits. That's county related. We dropped to 600. And then just this last year, we started seeing an uptick. We're up to 1,500 for 2022. And all predictions is that we're going to be above that here in 2023.
Wow. Okay. I'm curious, Brad, if you've, so one of the questions that I have, and I've had people ask me, and so I'm, gonna go to ask you this question is, what, as it relates to, something Roland said was people have this grace period, they were putting systems in. And so we're just, April 15th, is that right? Is that the implementation? That's the date NEM3 or net billing starts. But people are able to get in applications before then and still install under the current net metering, the 2.0, right?
That's right. And so everyone is rushing right now to finalize the projects that are in flight and get the interconnection applications submitted by April 14th. And if you have a complete application that is free of omissions and errors and it's submitted by April 14th, you are a NEM2 system. And even if you install it later, you have 3 years to actually install the system. So there will be big installation queues from especially the larger contractors, but even smaller ones are building up their queues. And that's going to keep crews busy. It's going to keep people in business this year as sales hit the floor and need to rebound, and we need to reinvent how to talk to customers about net metering.
How does that work in with my immediate response, or my immediate thought is, supply chain issues. Yes, I put in that I'm going to put in, I've got my whatever module 350 and 350 watt module, and then, but my supplier doesn't have that in 6 months. And so now I need to change to a, whatever 375. Are those kinds of changes, should the contractors expect those kinds of changes to bump them out of the queue, or how does that work?
You're allowed to make one set of changes to a pending application without withdrawing it and resubmitting it. And but it just cannot include a system size increase. So you use higher wattage panels, you're going to have to reduce the number of panels you use. Okay. It's common. It happens all the time.
Oh yeah.
It's allowed, but you only get one bite at the apple. So you wait until you're ready to redesign the system and you know exactly what you're going to do and put in the new equipment and go do it.
Okay, so that's good to know. Yeah, I wasn't quite sure if people were going to get bumped out of things because of that. So okay, so let's kind of talk a little bit. So this is NEM, a slider under NEM2, and so I think this gets into but what both Brad and Roland were talking about there, just in the differences in rates in terms of retail rate versus production rates. And so I guess, Brad, if you can talk to us about kind of what we're looking at here, and the shock and awe of SDG&E at mid-evening rates here.
Yeah, 80 cents a kilowatt hour, you can hardly believe it. But California rates have gone through the roof, even for the other two utilities. Those are extremely high rates. And even non-peak. So the two things that happened in M2 is they knocked about 2 cents off the export value. It's the rates minus certain charges that add up to 2 cents. So that was one change. The other change was mandatory TOU rates for residential customers. Commercial ag customers were already on mandatory TOU pretty much, and so it required all residential NEM customers to go on TOU rates at the same time as they shifted the peak to the evening hours. So having evening peaking rates with solar was a big step backward in terms of customer savings, right? If we used to sell high and buy low when it was just sort of a standard bell curve kind of rate, and it flipped. So that hit the economics. quite a bit right away at the beginning of NEM 2. But then since then, the overall rates have just grown and grown and grown to the point where even your off peak, if the lowest rate there is 30 cents, that's still a pretty high rate, right? And so there was a lot. So this is significant savings for the customer. I should focus on the above baseline because your first 300 kilowatt hours per month are actually less than this. So this isn't the full average rate picture, but if you're shaving off the usage from a high usage customer, it is these rates that you're shaving off, right? And so this is the reason there's been a push to change the export value to something that is not tied to rates.
So, okay, so actually a good question from Randy Batchelor came in, so I want to kind of throw that at you, Brad. And so he was asking if there are certain markets, if there's going to be certain, what parts of the behind the meter market do you expect to take the biggest hits? And asking, are there certain types of projects like virtual net metering, retail shopping center, industrial facilities, schools, et cetera, that will be more immune to the impacts? So is this going to be like, are the residential folks going to see this only, or how does this impact the industry, I guess, as a whole?
I think it'll be across the board. I think that the commercial projects, have a little less room to give. They haven't been thriving as much recently as residential has. So any headwinds on commercial is going to be pretty serious and agricultural. The one interesting nuance is that the PUC kicked the can down the road on virtual net metering and meter aggregation. So the NEM 2 remains after April 14th for VNEM and NEMA, for multi-meter properties. They're knocking down the term, and instead of getting 20 years of NEM 2, you only get 9 years of NEM 2, but you'll still get 9 years of NEM 2 in the second half of this year. That is going to change probably December this year. There'll be a change to create a NEM 3 version of those multi-meter tariffs. So we've got some reprieve for those shopping centers, apartment buildings for the time being. But once whatever the NEM 3 version of that ends up being, it's certainly going to be a hit, and it's going to make those projects difficult.
Okay. Interesting. So, well, let's jump, I think, to the next slide. It might be helpful to kind of relate this question I was going to ask as well. But so this gets into the net billing. And so I guess first of all, we've got a big heat map here. So I guess walk us through what we're looking at, Brad, and then I think I'll ask my questions from there.
Yeah. Okay. So these are the export rates under NEM 3, under the net billing, that instead of getting in something retail rates or close to retail rates, you get this for exports. When you buy power from the utility, you're paying regular rates. When you give power to the utility, you're getting this. And so there's a different value for every hour of the day, and those change monthly, and they're actually different on weekdays and weekends. So I'm showing here just the weekdays for one of the utilities. They're all pretty similar amongst the 3 big IOUs, and even between weekdays and weekends, there's not a huge difference. They all have the same shape, and the numbers aren't that different. So this is what we're looking at. And you look at April, May, we're generating a lot of power, noon, 2, 3 o'clock, and getting a penny, if that, for exports. It's basically you're getting nothing for the export in those midday spring hours. And even if you look at midday in the middle of summer, 5 cents, 4 cents for exports in those hours, and that's when we're generating at peak amounts. So if you throw just a regular solar production curve with expected exports from residential consumption against these numbers, the annual weighted average is around 5 cents. So you're going from 30 plus cents on average for export compensation to 5 cents overnight. That's going to be a shocker. And there's the complexity. We need to stare at this chart and really internalize it and think about, this is our future. This is what we're living with. And the positive side of this is you can see those couple hours, September from 6 to 8 p.m., you're getting upwards of $3 a kilowatt hour for exports. I mean, if you can put a battery in and focus on exporting to the grid during those hours, the value adds up pretty fast. August, some high value hours as well. So if you have a battery, most of the year you're going to be doing what you do today. You wait till the peak hours and then you follow the load. So you're buying less power during the TOU peak. But those 2 months of the year, you're going to want to store that power until 6 p.m. and then dump it on the grid as much as possible. And actually, the economics can be okay.
So and Tim asks or makes a comment, I think, or asks a question, kind of a comment about like, so is this, I mean, is this realistic for customers to be doing? So I guess the point is, you know, to take advantage of that $3 a kilowatt hour, that's, you know, incredible. But that means you need to be exporting at that point. That means you need to have a full battery. You need to not be charging the car, or doing whatever it is that, for whatever reason, at 8 o'clock everybody else is doing in September. So yeah, I mean, how are people, I guess, expected, or do you foresee people doing this? Is this through energy management systems, through the inverters? How is that?
Well, part of it will just be the battery operating modes, right? Already when we install a battery, it's got different operating modes. You can have it solar self-consumption. You can have it prioritizing backup power. You can have it maximizing TOU shifting. You know, it's the smarts that you put into the charge discharge. It's just the basic charge discharge pattern that we program our batteries to do. And that's done ahead. Usually you set it and forget it. It's done once. And, you know, if the TOU hours change, you might need to update it, but that rarely happens. This would be just another profile like that, where you do the same thing 10 months a year, but the another 2 months of the year, instead of starting to discharge the battery for on-site load during the TOU peak hour, when it starts at 4 p.m., you ignore that. Keep it fully charged until 6 p.m. and then full throttle. If it's the 7 kilowatt battery, you're putting out 7 kilowatts in over 2 hours, or however much storage you have, as much as possible beyond load. So if you have load controls, that helps, right? You can minimize load in those hours and more of it goes to exports. But even without load controls, if you're discharging at full power, a lot of it's going to go onto the grid.
Okay. So I think this gets into a little bit, I'm going to kind of move us forward here a little bit and have Roland kind of talk about some of the Hawaii things. But it's this aspect of it, the disconnect of the pricing, I think, is something that I want to kind of get into with, as we've seen it in Hawaii as well. So I guess we talked about this a little bit, Roland, but can you, so we're going to talk about kind of both the business side and the technical side here. So, you know, first off, as a business owner in Hawaii, so this was, you know, you experienced what California is going through, or and so kind of talk to us a little bit about it. We talked about the reduction of contractors, but, you know, what were some of the things that RES did in order to kind of, you know, weather the storm, if you will?
I mean, briefly touched on it. We were fortunate to have a foundation in off-grid systems, just higher complexity systems. And so when your typical net energy metering, end phase, string inverters, just exporting all their energy, getting a retail credit for it. Not only is the economic analysis pretty simple, so is the installation. It was pretty easy to scale up. A lot of companies didn't have any difficulties on technically training their crews to do a proper installation with minimal return visits or follow-up support. When the program changed, it affected kind of all aspects of the business. Not only was it the installation, it was the sales teams on how they were doing their economic analysis for these systems to properly predict the customer savings. So basically, seeing such a drastic change on retail value of energy versus exported energy, that now takes into consideration what the load profile is for the customer. If it was a business that the primary usage of their energy is during the day with air conditioning or manufacturing, you can still get a large portion of that PV system to offset at retail value because it's going to be consumed by the loads while it's being produced. If you're a residential system where both parents are working and no one's home during the day and there's minimal usage, then you're going to get almost no value for exported energy when it's being produced during the day. That energy, rather than exporting, would be storing it in a battery and then self-consumption of that battery in the night when they come home. So designing the size of the PV system and the size of the battery, not only on the economics, you're also on the system design. It becomes a lot more complicated. And when this first happened in Hawaii, we didn't have any third-party software that helped with this design. Each contractor was forced to do it in-house. And so adding that, as well as in the beginning of this transition to, we basically moved from batteries basically being backup power to batteries being utilized through self-consumption. That was a different integration method than it was available on the market at the time. Some of the early players, Sonnen, Tesla, shortly after Solar Edge with LG Chem, then we had Pika, which transitioned to Generac. You just saw a large amount of follow-up support that was needed. A lot of firmware updates, some being able to be done remotely, some needing to be done on site. A lot of return RMAs for different products. So it required a lot more technical necessity of technical knowledge, both on the sales, installation, and follow-up, that a lot of the larger companies weren't able to provide. So you saw a lot of them move forward very quickly on these new advanced systems, and then a lot of them not able to upkeep with that follow-up support. They didn't have the margins in there to provide the support that these new systems needed. So I think on the business perspective, that was one of the biggest things, is you're gonna have to build in a little higher margins into these projects while you get your staff technically trained, get your salespeople technically trained on selling these systems. I think we're in a better position in the market overall today than where we were in 2016, when Hawaii went through this. The products are getting more reliable. There is third-party software that models these systems accurately, and the products, yeah, like I said, are getting more reliable.
Roland, can I ask you a question? So we know each other a little bit. I mean, working with you, that just being so qualified in this area, what do you think are 2 or 3 things that RES has done, either in system design and engineering, working with Mayfield, or in the field and installation, that has helped you mitigate risk and be successful?
We changed our approach on the sales side to start. We moved from commission-based salespeople to salary-based salespeople. I know that's a huge move for a lot of larger companies, but what we were happy and we were seeing from a lot of the larger companies is salespeople not properly setting transparent standards of what the system was going to do and how much energy it was going to offset for a customer. So we wanted to invest more heavily in their training up front on the technical aspect. And for us to do that, we brought them in as salaried employees that went just from sales to project managers as well. So they'd be responsible for the customers from sales all the way through installation. So they were responsible to make sure that what they sold, 1, could be installed, and 2, set the expectations correctly with the customer. Beyond that, we have a full-time dedicated service department in our company. Just once again, on the customer satisfaction, the follow-up support in those early years was pretty heavy. We had almost 100% return rate on systems. Some of them, 4 to 5 trips for RMA or firmware updates. So 1, we built in higher margins in our project, something more similar to an off-grid system than a typical grid-tied system, and invested more heavily in the training for a wider band of our employees in the company.
And if I remember, or if I heard right, Roland, so you guys have something similar where your retail rate is, you were mentioning that it fluctuates. It's not a standard value, but it's somewhere around the 50 cents per kilowatt hour, and the production rate was down at like 10.5 cents, and so that was kind of a stable number, if I heard you right or understood that right. And so is that, I guess, first off, is that, I kind of summarize that right?
Yeah, correct. Definitely
Okay.
not as complex with changing per hour, per season, per month. So we had a fixed rate for the entire year.
So a similar thing of what California has, just it's not as variable. It's not a you don't have to create these intense heat maps like Brad was showing us to capture everything. So where, I guess, did that delta, the difference between those two prices, did that immediately like make battery systems something that people, it was a I don't want to say easy sale, but it made the economics work out? Or is there like a number there that you guys saw that kind of helped that?
Well, from when this first started till today, we've seen the cost of batteries, primarily lithium batteries. Old school off-grid with flooded lead acid took a large amount of time to educate your customer on how to live with them to get the expected life. We have a little we don't have to do that anymore with lithium batteries. So the cost came down, but those original years on the customer end, there was kind of a period of shock where they're like, hey, I used to get this great return. Now I'm getting something worse. I don't want to do it. And there was kind of just this stigma of like solar no longer works. A lot of people were frustrated and pissed off. So contractors that had a backlog was able to roll through that, especially if you're doing diversified product offerings off grid and energy efficiency upgrades, things like that, until the public kind of got over it. As in general, the public opinion started recognizing that yes, the returns, I mean, Hawaii in the heyday of net metering, commercial projects were getting under a 2-year return. Residential on average was 4 to 5. Now that almost doubled to 10 years. Now with energy storage, we're averaging around 8 to 10 years, depending on system specifics for residential. But yeah, it took a little while for the public opinion to change, as well as the product offering cost dropped and got a little more reliable.
Okay. We got a good question, I think, here that came in directed to you, Roland, so thought I'd throw it out there. So it says, so this is from Peter, do you find yourself doing smaller residential systems, not to overproduce back to the grid, and only enough to charge battery backup to use the stored power during peak periods? Is that a strategy you're taking with your system designs?
Yeah, I mean, you're here in Hawaii, we don't get granular data from the utility on customer usage. We're just now rolling out smart meters. So we would have to based on a conversation with the customer, we would input some sort of load profile. Did they have a pool? Did they have air conditioning? Were they home during the day? So we put a load profile on it. Your energy storage was cycling to whatever the recommended capacity that the battery manufacturer recommends for daily cycling. And you're just hitting your average, say 80 to 90% of the time. Any extreme cases of higher usage, you would be getting that energy from the grid. So self-consumption from an average night. So not like off-grid where you're building in days of autonomy. The economics wouldn't work out in that case. So you're just cycling a battery, typically lithium, on a daily average consumption.
Okay, cool. Let's talk a little bit about on the technical side. So I mean, we've already touched on some of it for sure, but back, so when this all started for you guys, 2015, either far fewer products available being offered. You'd mentioned some of the products you had used in the past. And I think you touched on a lot of these, but was there anything else that you wanted to kind of comment on, and just in terms of customer expectations, support, those kinds of things, and difference between 2015 and today?
Yeah, I mean, I think do your due diligence. There's a lot of new products coming. I mean, SPI this year, everybody from Duracell to all these name brands are coming out with their own battery and solution. Some of them integrated with the inverter, some of them separate. But I think a lot of companies are rushing their product to the market, and they're not vetting it through beta testing as much as they used to, I'd say. So one, you need to have someone with technical experience vetting the products in-house. I mean, we typically, before we start selling a new product, we'll test it at one of our, either here at our shop or one of our homes, to make sure it's going to be able to work and operate the way the spec sheet is telling you it's going to. Make sure there's a tech support that is there that answers the phone and is knowledge and can help you work through things. We saw a lot of products just not ready to be commercially viable. Systems not working, not meeting what your salesperson of the product said said it was going to do a lot of, RMA process going through and replacing components. And, and we still see it today with some of these new product offerings. Basically, the product's not able to deliver what the sales team from the manufacturer is promising. So before you go out there and sell a whole bunch of systems, I would just do your own internal vetting of the product and technical analysis of it.
Awesome. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, business models and kind of what to expect. I think, how the industry should be looking, taking the Hawaii cases and projecting forward. So Robert, this is, I'd say, your area of expertise. So, let's talk a little bit about, what should the companies be doing and how should these models be changing?
Yeah, I think Roland touched on this a bit, and we've seen it at Mayfield the past couple of years. Some clients in Texas after the storms 2 years ago. A lot of it has to do with technical expertise and industry acumen across the board, from the sales process to system design and engineering and the field install. There's just a lot more complexity when you start integrating battery backup and energy storage systems, customer service, as Roland's noting, answering questions, qualifying products, product selection. The thing that I've seen, partially working with different manufacturers that are trying to roll out new battery products, and with EPC clients, a lot of people are coming to solar through energy storage. And I think we're going to see that more and more in the coming years. One of the recent surveys that went out by SunPower, like 92% of the people cited high energy bills as the primary reason to pursue solar. The second reason at 88% was resiliency and battery backup. So with net metering changing, there's two other pressures that I don't think are going to go away. Utility bills continue to rise, and in certain aspects of the grid, battery backup's becoming more and more important. When you think about your business model or operations, one of the biggest issues in the industry is recruiting and hiring, right? We're all going after the same people. Have to get ahead of that even further. You see that all the time. And kind of this last bullet, it's something that I dealt with years ago. Many solar consultants on the sales side, you're selling to the payback period. I think now we're looking at more of a nuanced conversation about the different benefits of solar and battery backup. It's not as simple as just the payback period. And I would also hope that there's some better financial tools coming out there. It's something that I kind of got away from that when I broke into the industry 15 years ago. It was a big issue, like trying to come up with financial tools and clean energy works and things of that ilk. I think now there might be a renaissance of financial products coming in and trying to understand the ones that benefit your customers. That can be a lot to wade through as well.
Guys, thinking about that, and I don't necessarily call these like financial tools, but we had talked about the group here. We had talked about some of the modeling, and Roland, you had talked about, you guys have built up something in-house that you're doing some modeling. And then, so Brad, I was going to ask you, you had mentioned during all this to help the contractors with this 3.0 or this net billing, there's software programs out there now that are going to kind of help us do that. And, Energy Toolbase gets thrown out there, Solar Nexus, I know of. And there, you had mentioned a few others that you had known of that are working with, and I don't know if they're working with CALSSA directly or just the CALSSA membership. but what are you seeing there in terms of that kind of support to help the sales process?
Yeah, I would point to 5 different tools. There's the Solar Nexus, Energy Toolbase, also Enact Systems, and Aurora Solar, in addition to Open Solar. I know that all 5 of those do have NEM 3 modules up and running at various levels of sophistication and precision. I think they'll all need to be refined as time goes on, but they all have something that can model out NEM 3 right now. Definitely recommend to subscribe to one of those. I know that it's a subscription you have to undertake, but the era of looking at monthly bills and telling a customer, trust me, we're going to save you money, that used to be very confidently true. Now you need to be a little more precise. And so but those tools are set up to model it, maximize the savings, and then generate the proposal for customers. And what I found with initial exploration of different configurations on the residential side under NEM 3 is you can have decent savings if we're solar only if it's a large customer and a small system. Those if it's solar only, those export rates at midday are low. And so you're not counting on a lot of value from exports. You want a smaller system. You still want to be net meter. 5 cents is better than 0 if that's your average exports, but that's not where you're making your money. And so you want to just be reducing power consumption, have a smaller system. For a larger customer, it works. For a smaller customer, it's hard to even make it work at all with solar only. Add a battery, and any size customer is going to be able to get positive cash flow from day one. 7% loan, the numbers work out. They're tighter than they used to be, but you can get savings there if you design the system in the appropriate size.
Hey, Brad, I had a question. Here in Hawaii, the export is just a credit that's coupled with usage. So if you exported 300 kilowatt hours, but you only consumed 100 on average, you wouldn't get 3 times the credit. It would only be, you'd only get credit for the 100 that was consumed outside of offset. Is that the case in California?
Well, it rolls over from month to month. So if you have excess credits in a month, it carries over until the end of the annual true-up period. At the true-up period, if you have excess generation, it gets paid out at a wholesale rate. So that's not really the intention. It's it's still to offset your own usage, but you can design that on an annual basis.
Gotcha.
Great. Kind of I wanted to circle back on this, selling the benefits beyond the payback period and things. And Robert, you've worked with a number of contractors across the U.S. And so I think you've seen kind of the good and the bad in terms of embracing or pushing away storage, as the case may be, in different markets. I'm curious on what you've seen, in other markets. I know Texas comes to mind, just in terms of working with the sales staff specifically, I'm thinking of, but how to get people up to speed, how to get them this information so that they can effectively talk to customers and actually put something together that makes sense for the clients.
So I'm going to answer this question kind of in 2 parts. What I've seen over the past 2 to 3 years is contractors either lean into it hard and say, we're going to figure this out, we're going to sell it, and we're going to install it. And I've seen contractors shy away from energy storage. It's too early. There's too much risk. That's kind of what I've seen in different markets. And there's opportunities and challenges with both of them. From my vantage point, it's unavoidable. It's something that you have to get in front of because customers are looking for it. They're expecting it. I think Roland answered it pretty well. The reality is you have to build technical expertise in-house to the depth and degree that you can in regard to electrical engineering and design, or you've got to farm it out. I don't want to bring up you, Ryan, and project consulting, but the reality is that The only way to wrap your arms around the technology from the sales side or install or from a financial perspective is if you don't have the technical expertise or the industry acumen in-house, work with other companies. Brad was kind of mentioning software tools. Solar Nexus is another one of my clients, or project consulting. It's not a simple thing, and it costs money and trying to vet the right sources. But yeah, there's really no simple answer. If you don't have the technical expertise in the house, you have to fund it outside and make sure you have proper resources. And following up with some of these contractors a couple of years later, I think some of the people that try to address it internally without the proper resources really got hurt pretty significantly. And I think part of what you have to do is mitigate risk, so you're not losing money in this transition.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think Roland was talking about everything about it is kind of jumping into the kind of the new side of it is there's a lot of uncertainties all the way from manufacturers' products all the way through salespeople and things like that. So it's important.
And I think, well, and I think you talked about it a bit, but I mean, like, you're going to have to bid more margin into your jobs.
Yep.
To a degree. Do less jobs for more money, if possible, in certain markets.
Cool. I'm going to keep an eye on time. We're getting close to the top of the hour, so I'm going to just kind of put some of these key takeaways up on the screen. I don't know if we need to talk a whole lot to all of these because we've talked about them, but there's a number of good questions that came in, so I wanted to throw those out there. And so Randy followed up with a question on in front of the meter projects, and so Brad, it was directed at you. I guess first of all, how much are you following the front of the meter projects? And the question is, is that an avenue that you expect or that you're seeing contractors moving into, doing some of these CCA type projects, utility programs, things like that, in order to kind of mitigate some risk here?
Well, they're great contracts if you can get them, right? There's the CCAs have been buyers off and on for years, and you can get a big contract, but there's way more projects and developers than there are CCAs ready to buy. We've had a lot of projects that looking for a buyer. And so, but that's going to continue. It'll march on gradually. That'll continue. There's also the other one that's interesting is virtual power plants that you can participate with a front of meter resource. And there are programs getting established that will pay you to perform during certain high value hours. And the numbers can work out. And so I think, the concept of a, 3 megawatt battery standalone in every neighborhood where it's getting paid to help the grid is one that's really solid, and solar if there's space for it. So those projects are going to happen.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like a lot of my perception here is that a lot of the companies that are going to be affected are kind of the smaller. Maybe they're focused in on residential and don't have that capability, maybe moving into these larger scale projects. So I think that might be a little bit heavier of a lift, if you will, for those folks as these changes occur.
And at the end of the day, you're looking at a more complicated sale, right? So you have to better understand the technology. You have to understand financial modeling. You have to be more cognizant and aware of your lending tools. You have to partner. So before, where the payback period is shorter and it's a more direct, easier sale, it's a less nuanced conversation. The environment's changing pretty quickly, and to Roland's credit, you have to dive in, wrap your arms around the technology, and be smart about your sales process and mitigate risk and install. It's just a much more nuanced reality.
Cool. So another question that came in, Daniel sent a couple of good questions in. One was, does discharging to the grid preclude you from taking the 30% ITC? And this is one where I'm going to have to, let my ignorance show it. Like, I don't know what that is. So does anybody on the panel happen to have any insight on that aspect?
I think the answer is no, that you qualify for ITC as a net metered or net billing system. You can discharge the grid, including with the battery, as long as you follow the local utility and tariff rules. It's a customer sited system. It's a solar, if it's a solar generating system, according to the ITC guidelines, it's pretty broad.
Okay.
Yeah, I think my understanding is prior to the current amendment with the extension of the ITC, you wouldn't get the ITC for energy storage if it was charged from the grid. It wasn't about export. I think that's been revised now or removed that delineation. So in all cases, you should be able to get the ITC for your energy storage projects.
Cool. And then another question that he asked was about if the ESS systems don't have the 9540 listing, will they be allowed to interconnect with the utility? And so, Brad, I don't know if you have like direct with the utility information on that one.
Well, we have another deadline coming up, March 28th, that all inverters have to be certified to 1741 SB, which is basically equivalent to the latest 95, or you're talking 9540.
Correct.
Yeah, so the inverter deadline is coming up. So that is another one to pay attention to make sure in California that you're using inverters to the latest standard. 9540 is required by all local jurisdictions. They don't all enforce it. It's kind of 50-50 whether they're looking at the 9540, but they all should, according to the code. There's a lot of confusion though. There's a lot of misunderstanding. What is 9540A? Is that mandatory? All these questions are going to take a lot of hand-holding with local building departments.
Yeah, so I wasn't, off the cuff, I wasn't real clear if that was something that was a specific thing for utility interconnection applications or not.
No, I mean, the utility just say everything has to be listed.
Listed, right?
Yeah, and the application is really a checkbox. I attest that everything is listed.
Yeah, and I mean, there's other ways of getting your system listed. So there are, I would think there would be ways of making that applicable. Can California legacy NEM systems add panels that will be grandfathered?
This big question. If you have a NEM 1 or NEM 2 system and you add capacity to it after April 14th, if you apply for a capacity addition after April 14th, you lose your NEM status and get rolled into NEM 3. So the answer is no, you can't add to it later without losing your NEM status. And you also can't add to it now and get a new 20-year grandfathering period. The question a lot of people have is, can I just restart the clock by doubling the system size? The answer is definitely no. If you submit an application today for a system size increase, additional capacity, you can stay in NEM 1 or you can stay in NEM 2, but it doesn't restart the clock. So you're there for the remainder of the original 20-year period. Okay,
great. Well, we're getting right to the top of the hour, so I want to make sure that we get to the last slide here as well. So, some of our key takeaways, we didn't directly talk about these, but I think some of them are maybe obvious and some of them are things that people are gonna have to work through. And so a big part of this from my perspective is this last bullet, business financial case, is in the storage and microgrids are going to rise, and so these systems are going to get more complex, need for a higher level of support, maybe from outside the your traditional ways is going to be a big part of it. So I think that's just one of the things for people to take away from a lot of this. So with that, we're right at the top of the hour, so I want to be respectful of time. But here is all of our contact information. I just want to thank everybody, Brad, Roland, Robert, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Those in the audience, appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to listen. If we weren't able to get to your questions, you can feel free to reach out to us directly. Happy to. I'm happy to. I won't speak for those on the panel. Happy to talk and support as much as possible. For those of you that are in California, I'll do a little plug for CALSSA. If you're not already a member, you definitely should be. So this is, CALSSA's out there fighting the good fight, trying to provide resources and, make people like Brad available to the industry. So I would suggest, looking into that. And there's some great member-only type resources out there. So with that, thank you all very much. I appreciate it. And I hope you all have a great day.
Thanks, Ryan.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you.